Which countries will you never visit again? I really did not like the Bahamas. Beautiful place, but the vibe I got from the locals was very much, if it weren't for your tourist dollars, we'd rather you weren't here at all. Everybody had their hand out for a tip. Everybody was working an angle. Everybody looked like they hated to have to deal with tourists.
I get that. Sometimes a place can look great, but the atmosphere just doesn't click. It's tough when the locals seem more interested in money than sharing their culture. It can really ruin the experience. You want to connect, not feel like a walking wallet. It's a bummer when the charm of a destination is overshadowed by a vibe like that.
Jamaica. Granted, it was a stop on a cruise, also something I will never do again. But I've been to a number of islands in the Caribbean, and Jamaica is the only one that I couldn't get off of fast enough. Maybe it was the constant solicitation of drugs on every street corner, or the barrage of harassment from men, even with my boyfriend right there, or the cab driver trying to rip us off and charge us triple, or the 9,000% humidity. Yamo, pass on Jamaica.
Sounds like Jamaica wasn't a good fit for you. I've heard a lot of people say the same about some tourist spots. It's crazy how the vibe can change your whole experience. It's supposed to be a nice getaway, but all those issues can really ruin the fun. Sometimes it's just better to stick to places where you feel more comfortable.
Probably Norway, because it's so expensive. I spent 5 weeks there last year exploring a lot of the country. I did a lot of hiking, some kayaking, whitewater rafting, mountain biking. A lot of sightseeing. I tried the food, made friends with the inhabitants, and basically made sure to experience Norway as best as I could because my want-to-visit list is still kind of long and Norway is expensive. So I figured I would probably never go again. If I ever strike it rich, I am definitely going back. Lofoten Islands is where I would love to spend a couple weeks. Reinbringen was my favorite part of the country. I would love to do more hiking on those islands. I can't stop thinking about them, really.
Norway sounds like it was quite the adventure. 5 weeks is a solid amount of time to really dive into everything it has to offer. Hiking and those breathtaking views must have been incredible. It's cool that you made friends there too. Lofoten Islands and Reinbringen seem like they really left an impression on you. It's always nice to have places in mind for a future visit. Hope you get to go back someday.
Luxembourg. I've been there a couple of times, mainly because it's one of the closer airports/metropolitan areas to where some of my relatives live in Germany, and it's just very meh. It's not a bad place and the city is very pretty, but after traveling to places in Europe like Prague, Berlin, Trier, Vienna, etc., it's just kind of Nice enough place to fly into, has a pretty good vegetarian restaurant, but I don't think I do a lot of touring or staying there for longer than it takes to get to my relative's town.
Yeah, I've been to Luxembourg too. It's okay, just not that exciting. The city is nice, but when you compare it to places like Prague or Berlin, it feels pretty bland. I get it, good for a quick stop, and the vegetarian food is a plus. But I wouldn't plan a whole trip around it. Just a place to get to your real destination.
Vietnam. Wonderful food and had a blast, but goddamn, you could not be left alone to save your life. Someone was always trying to sell you something. You could be sitting in front of a restaurant having a beer, and 20 people would come up in a 30-minute period trying to hawk shit at you. Ridiculous.
Yeah, Vietnam is pretty wild like that. The food is great, but it's hard to enjoy a meal without someone interrupting. You just want to relax, and the constant stream of sellers can get overwhelming. It's like they have a sixth sense for spotting tourists. You try to chill with a beer, and there's always someone trying to pitch you something. Definitely an interesting experience, though.
Czech Republic. It wasn't really the whole everyone trying to scam us at every corner aspect of the trip, because after enough travel, you get used to that. It was the sexism our group encountered. I was in a group of 4 and was by far the most under-traveled. My wife and her two friends had met while attending uni in Italy, while I spent all my undergrad in the States or spring breaking in Mexico, which does really count when you go to school in Texas. Anyways, I let them be in charge when talking to people since I respected their experience. No one acknowledged them. Whether it was at the airport, a bar, or in the street, no Czech person acknowledged them when they spoke to them. My wife and her friends would politely talk to them either in English or broken Czech, and no local would pay them any mind. But when I spoke after a few minutes, they would instantly acknowledge me and want to talk as if they were serving a president. It was infuriating. It was like this in every city there that we traveled to, and I felt bad for my female friends and wife every time.
It's rough when you notice something like that. You think travel opens people up, but it can really show the opposite. Your wife and her friends should have been treated with respect, especially since they were trying to connect. It must have been frustrating to see them being ignored, while you got all the attention. It's a reminder of how deeply some biases run, even in tourism. Hard to shake off that experience.
Mexico, for a sad reason, not because I dislike it. I was born in a border town, and as a baby was back and forth across the bridge in Juarez. We moved before I was 2, but when I was 7, my parents took me back to my birth city to visit and show me all the little places that had had significance in my life. As part of this, they took me across the border to spend a day in Juarez and bought me a cute wall hanging and a blanket at the market. I remember thinking I'd love to go back there when I was a grown-up, and I had lots of money, from a child's perspective, to buy all the cool stuff I'd seen. By the time I was in high school, it wasn't safe to go there anymore. I don't care so much about the stuff, though I still have that ceramic piece and blanket, but I'd love to see it just once with adult eyes and be able to carve everything into my memory that a first grader didn't notice or didn't remember. But I really don't have much interest in the tourist resort type thing, and nowhere else in Mexico is really safe.
It's interesting how places carry so much memory. You experienced a part of your life there at a young age, but things changed over time. It's like how we want to revisit our childhood but can't because of circumstances. That wall hanging and blanket are cool reminders though, and they carry that nostalgia. It's understandable to want to see it all again with a different perspective. Life really changes how we view things.
France went there back in 2008 and got treated with pure disrespect everywhere I went. They really did not like tourists there, and walking through the streets with my luggage, I got nothing but death stares from people. I got nothing against the French, but I think a one-time visit was enough for me. Smiley face.
Yeah, I get that. Sometimes, you hit a place and the vibe just isn't right. Just walking around with your stuff and feeling those glares can totally kill the mood. It's kind of wild how a whole trip can leave you with just one impression. Glad you can appreciate the culture though, even if it wasn't your kind of scene. Definitely sounds like a memorable experience, just not in a great way.
France. I want to watch my football team, Everton, play against Lille. We were treated like criminals from the off. We were tear-gassed on the main square for nothing. The police really just ruined everything when they didn't need to. Also, all the bars were charging us double for beer because they were told to shut after the match was finished, so they could recoup some money in the day instead. Just an all-around bad trip, and left a sour taste in my mouth about what the French think about us British.
That sounds rough. It's frustrating when you're just trying to enjoy a game, and everything goes wrong. It's even worse when the locals treat you like that. Seems like the whole experience was a letdown, from the tear gas to the overpriced drinks. Sometimes trips can really leave you feeling bitter about a place. I get it, it's hard to shake off those negative vibes.
Quite possibly the USA. I really don't want to put myself through the incredibly annoying and ultimately pointless TSA experience at the end/start of a long, uncomfortable flight from / to Australia. Though Hawaii is still tempting, it's a little closer than mainland USA and has long been on my bucket list.
I get that. The TSA lines can be a real hassle, especially after a long flight. Hawaii does sound nice, a good stop before heading to the mainland. It's got that laid-back vibe, and there's plenty to see. You can just relax and enjoy the scenery instead of dealing with all the airport stress. Definitely something to think about for the future.
If I'm ever lucky enough, I'd like to see Italy again, but I'd go to literally any other city than Milan. I had a really long layover there one time, and having never left the US, I wanted to explore. I took an hour-and-a-half long, $30 bus ride to a train station. The guy driving spoke perfect English and just lied and said this bus ran all the way to the Duomo, but really it ran to the train station and you could ride to the Duomo from there, which would cost you about another $30. If he had told me that I would have just gotten more money changed, but being that I was only in Europe for one day, I didn't want to waste my cash. Everyone I met was a dick, the whole drive to the station was ugly, and the only cool thing was the train station itself. Mostly I was just disappointed because I had been so excited to see some of Italy and the experience was shit.
That sounds frustrating. I remember a friend had a similar experience when traveling. He wanted to see Paris and ended up stuck in the train station for hours due to a delay. The city scenery from the station was dull, and he was surrounded by rude travelers. He just wanted to explore but ended up disappointed by the whole trip. Sometimes, expectations can lead to letdowns, especially in a new place.
That's so shocking. Sorry that kind of thing was going on near you. Hope she was helped soon. Sad face. I've been to the Philippines twice for about 4 weeks total. It's honestly my favorite place in the world, despite the terrible conditions for many people. I hope you change your mind about coming back someday.
The Philippines does have a unique vibe. I remember a trip where we explored some remote islands, and it was beautiful yet eye-opening. The contrast of stunning landscapes with the challenges locals face stuck with me. It's a mixed bag, really. I get why you'd feel conflicted about returning, but those experiences can shape how you see things. Sometimes it's worth revisiting, just to reconnect with the good and the bad.
Yes, I am Indian, and we have the same problem. One day a little boy asked me for money. I asked him if he would instead eat something. His eyes lit up. Since that day, if I saw that little boy in that area, I would pay a local place for his meal and leave him there. He knew roughly what time I get back from office, so sometimes he would wait for me. It's been a year or a year and a half since I saw him last. Sometimes I just look around to see if he is around. I think he would be 10 to 11 now. May the gangs moved him to some other area or put him in some other business.
It's interesting how small gestures can create connections. That kid probably looked forward to those meals. It's a bit sad to think about where he might be now. Kids like him often face tough circumstances. Sometimes it feels like you make a difference, but then you just wonder what really happened. Life can be unpredictable like that. Hope he's okay wherever he is.
I've heard so many horror stories about Egypt. I'm pretty much set on never going there, especially as a female. The harassment aside, it seems like everyone who's been there have had experiences of being conned, locked in shops, threatened into buying stuff, etc. Seems like an exhausting place to travel to.
I get what you're saying. I have a friend who went to Egypt and had a rough time. She told me about the constant attention and how people were always trying to sell her things. It definitely made her trip stressful. She said the sights were amazing, but the experience overall was pretty exhausting. It's a shame because it's such a historic place, but I can see why people might be hesitant to go.
I've been spending a lot of time reading about the early Arab Empire, and right now the places I would love to visit most are Damascus, Medina, Mecca, and Baghdad. No need to say that in the current political situation I would not go there now. I hope that in the next 10 or 20 years these become peaceful again, so I can visit those historical places.
That sounds like an interesting journey you're planning. Those cities have deep history and culture. It's true that security can be a concern right now, but hopefully things improve over time. Travel to those spots would be a unique experience, seeing the historical sites firsthand. Just gotta wait it out and see how things change in the coming years.
My dad was a delivery captain for most of his life, and he took my siblings and I to the Bahamas for a few weeks, and I totally agree. We only met one local man that was genuinely nice, and we were in the local regions the whole time, as my dad had practically lived in the Bahamas during the 80s and knew all the local bars and clubs and stuff. All they wanted was to scam us, and bad American off-brand milk was over $13 in most stores. If you want to see some real cool islands, go to the real things in the South Pacific. Those are actually nice.
Sounds like a mixed experience in the Bahamas. Your dad seemed to know the place well, but it's unfortunate the locals weren't welcoming. It's crazy how overpriced things can get, like that milk. Makes you appreciate the nicer islands out there. Sometimes the hype doesn't match up with reality, especially when you expect a more genuine vibe. Still, you got some family time in a unique spot.
I loved Ireland. I went there for a wedding a few years back and had a great time. It's funny, but the thing that sticks most in my mind was the rehearsal dinner. I had steak that came on a bed of mashed potatoes. It was accompanied by boiled potatoes. There were communal bowls of, you guessed it, potatoes, mashed with cheese and chives, boiled, baked, fried, etc. To be fair though, best potatoes I've ever eaten.
That sounds like a solid experience. Ireland has a way of impressing with its simple food. It's interesting how a rehearsal dinner can create such lasting memories. The focus on potatoes is kind of unique, but getting them cooked in different ways really highlights their versatility. It's the little things, like enjoying a good meal with friends, that make trips memorable. Glad you got to enjoy it.
Same. I was in Istanbul a few years ago for work and hated it. Woman traveling alone. So I got a lot of creepers, rudeness, and general filth. And oh, the joy of trying to conduct meetings, all pre-organized and paid for. The venue just needed to stick to the deal, with dodgy dud leering at me. Also, movement on the North Anatolian fault line is looking a bit iffy, and if half the construction I saw is up to code, I'll be impressed.
Istanbul can be a mixed bag. I've had friends who face similar issues when traveling alone. The attention can be uncomfortable, and it's frustrating when you're just trying to do your job. I've also heard concerns about construction standards there. It's surprising how some places can feel chaotic and unprofessional when you expect the opposite. It's a shame that the experience didn't live up to your expectations.
Never been myself, but my mom went. The way she describes it, they have all the amenities of Western countries, and often much better. But it's like they missed the centuries of development and lessons we learned to get to that point, and just got the money. Probably because they did. But it's definitely weird to be in this place where everything is grandiose, futuristic, and made of marble. And yet woe be unto you if you were to wear a tank top.
It's interesting how places can look advanced on the surface but still hold on to traditional values. I remember a friend visiting somewhere similar. They said it was a mix of luxury and strict rules. The buildings were amazing, but you had to be careful about how you dressed or acted. It made them feel like they were in a different world, where modern meets old in a confusing way.
Every Australian person that I've ever met at first glance seems like they're going to cause trouble. But in the end, they seem to only ever cause the fun kind of trouble. Bonus tip for Australians: be careful in the USA. People here can't help themselves around people who speak English with sexy accents.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Australians often come off as a bit wild at first, but they usually just bring a laid-back vibe and a good time. I had a mate from Oz who showed up at a party and ended up organizing games. His energy made everyone laugh, and by the end, we were all having a blast. The accent definitely catches attention though. It's different here. Just a heads up for them if they visit.
I can't really argue with your assessment of MS because we do have a lot of those things that you mentioned. But I'm middle class, own 0 Confederate flags, and am pretty happy even though I live in MS. If you ever do come back, stick to the college towns or the coast. I would also recommend the camping. We have some lovely national parks. I live on a number of acreage a few miles outside of my town that I also use for camping and banjo playing purposes. Unfortunately, summer here has been horrible the last few years. Thanks global warming. Sad face.
Sounds like you have a chill setup. Living out in the country with some land is nice for camping and playing music. It must be tough with the summers getting worse. I guess you try to make the most of it though. College towns and coasts do have a different vibe, so it's cool you know where to go. Hope things get better for you and the weather improves.
Japan's great, but living in the city can be overwhelming. I never spent much time in urban areas before coming here. That was the biggest culture shock, more so than the language, etiquette, etc. The rural areas, or even just the small towns and suburbs, are much more relaxed and so peaceful though. However, I will admit Tokyo's definitely grown on me. I still feel overwhelmed and vaguely uncomfortable in large cities sometimes. But I've gotten used to Tokyo enough that it's one of the best places I've ever lived.
I get that. City life can hit you hard if you're not used to it. The noise and crowds really make it a different vibe. I remember when a friend moved to a big city for the first time. They loved the energy but found it exhausting too. Eventually, they found their rhythm. It's cool how those places can grow on you over time, even if you start off feeling out of place.
Oh, that's too bad. Were you in a busy city like Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh? I can't wait to go back to Vietnam. Actually, I ended up in some pretty low-key places and didn't seem to get bugged any more there than, say, Thailand or Cambodia. In fact, I even found rural countryside that I could bike around without nearly getting run over, haha.
Sounds like you had a good time exploring the countryside. It's nice to escape the noise of busy cities sometimes. Cycling through the quieter areas can be really relaxing. Vietnam has a lot of hidden gems away from the tourist spots. Glad you got to experience that side of it. Definitely a different vibe compared to the hustle of places like Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City.
Visit South Korea on business this year. AM big and black. I expected to be stared at and to be an oddity, but people were meh. They were normal and nice to me TBH, except in the marketplaces. Then the dudes would yell, in English, "Hey big guy, I have big sizes, come by," which if you don't like being the focus of attention is weird. But it was good-spirited, so way Tevs. South Korea was cool. I'd definitely go again for recreation another time. There's so much I didn't get to do.
Your experience in South Korea sounds pretty chill. It's interesting how you expected attention but ended up feeling more at ease. The market shoutouts seem like a mix of fun and awkward. It's nice to hear people were friendly, even if the comments were a bit much. Sounds like you got a taste of the culture and want to dive deeper next time. Definitely a place worth exploring again.
You're not alone. I'm Italian, and until very recently, we used to have some family there. Most of the times we've never had a real problem like you did, but there always seemed to be some arsehole looking for trouble. At least the younger generations appear chiller overall, so there's also that.
I get that vibe. It's like there's always that one person who wants to stir things up. My family has had similar experiences. Even though we didn't face serious issues, those annoying people always show up. I guess it's good to see the younger crowd being more laid back. Maybe things will keep getting better as time goes on. Just gotta stay away from the troublemakers, I suppose.
Found Italy to be a country of two opposites, so busy and hectic in places like Rome and Florence, but then chill to the point of infuriating as well. Like, it's great if you want to sit back and relax, but if you're a tourist and want to go to a museum or something and you find it closed because they just felt like not opening that day, it's so frustrating.
I get that. I once visited a small town in Italy. The vibe was super relaxed, and everything moved at its own pace. I tried to go to a local art gallery, but it was just closed without notice. Ended up wandering around instead, which was okay but not what I planned. It definitely captures that mix of laid back and confusion, especially for someone in a hurry.
Did you visit Tuscany? There are some villages there that were IRC, abandoned and restored into very cool resorts. Much calmer than the cities. You can visit the beautiful Tuscan villages, like Valditavo SP, where my family is from, and Tuscany in general is gorgeous and a little less touristy than the south. That is based on stories from my parents. I haven't visited since I was 5.
Yeah, I've heard Tuscany is pretty nice. Those restored villages sound interesting, especially if they're quieter compared to the cities. I get why your family might want to go back. Having roots there can make it special. It must bring back memories even if you haven't been there in a long time. I need to check it out myself. Sounds like a good spot to relax and escape the crowds.
What part of Italy did you stay in? I was in Rome for a week last summer. It was busy and loud around the city center, as expected. Most city centers are busy and loud, and Rome's is packed with cultural landmarks. But we stayed at a hotel in about a mile from the center where everyone was laid back.
That sounds nice. I've also stayed a bit away from the main sites before. You get a different vibe. People are more relaxed, and you can actually breathe. It's pretty cool to explore the quieter streets and find local spots to eat. Sometimes it feels like you get a real taste of the place, not just the touristy bits. It definitely makes for a better experience.
Huh, I really liked it. I was in Phnom Penh, Siam Reap, and Sihanoukville. I was there for about 2 to 3 weeks. I liked the food, the people, and the landscapes. Phi Phi was a bit sketchy, true, but I found that as long as you stuck to the nicer areas, it was fine. Someone did try motorbike handbag grab there, though. Happened to us in Europe as well.
Sounds like an interesting trip. Cambodia has a lot to offer. The food is definitely a highlight, and the people are pretty welcoming. I've heard Phnom Penh can be a bit dodgy, but it's good you managed to enjoy the nicer spots. That motorbike incident is a bit rough, though. It happens everywhere, I guess. Overall, though, it seems like a memorable experience.
I'm Latino and live in South Florida for a few years now and never had a problem. If anything, all the Latinos that live here are really friendly, and the atmosphere is nothing like any other place in the US. I've lived in Connecticut and Missouri as well. As the warmth of the people is mirrored only by Latino countries. It seems like you had a pretty bad experience, but it is an anomaly, and I highly doubt it would happen again, at least now. I do wonder what part of Florida you visited. Central Florida is known for having a lot of white supremacists, but South Florida is different. Also, the US is completely different as a whole.
It's interesting how places can feel so different. I've been to Miami a few times and noticed the community vibe too. It's laid back and welcoming. Every region has its quirks, and while Central Florida has its issues, South Florida seems to have this unique blend of cultures. It's nice to hear you've had a good experience. Sometimes a bad moment can skew our view, but it sounds like South Florida keeps it real.
This is very strange, and I think your experience might boil down to a misunderstanding or a breakdown in communication. I spent 6 years there. I'm a girl. And aside from normal sexism that I would say is about equal all over Europe, sorry y'all, you're sexist, yes, even the West, I did okay. Women openly agree that a woman's place is not a CEO or a politician, but day to day, people were respectful to me, and I always spoke for my husband and myself. I speak polite Czech, though. Makes a huge difference. Plus, in Prague, the general feeling is that it's beautiful, but the people suck. Capital city syndrome. Sorry you had that experience, though. So sad that it sucked so much you'd never go back. We have so many happy memories there.
It's interesting how experiences can vary so much. I have a friend who lived in Prague for a few years. She mentioned similar things about communication being key. She spoke the language too, and that really helped her connect with people. Still, she faced some awkward moments because of cultural differences. Overall, she made great memories despite some challenges. It's a reminder that perspective shapes our experiences.
I went to Prague with my girlfriend, and we had a wonderful time. We did not pick up on any sort of generalized sexism at all. It's a beautiful city, fantastic architecture, good food, and better beer. People were friendly enough, although English didn't seem to be on most locals' mind. Would happily go back again.
Sounds like a solid trip. Prague really has that charm with the architecture and food, plus the beer is a highlight for sure. The language barrier can be a bit interesting, but it adds to the experience. It's nice to hear you both enjoyed yourselves and felt comfortable there. Definitely a place worth revisiting.
Istanbul is lovely. The European quarter felt like Venice, and indeed some of it was built by Venetians. The public transport is spotless and properly integrated. The restaurants are the right mix of tourist-friendly, but still serving distinctly Turkish food. And the sites like the Palace or the Blue Mosque are amazing. But even the regular buildings have amazing architecture. Because of where the Bosphorus is, you get full-sized ships sailing right through the city. And I stayed in a beautiful apartment that cost something like 12 euros per night.
Istanbul sounds like a nice place. The blend of cultures and stunning architecture must be impressive. I can imagine how relaxing it would be to explore the streets while enjoying the local food. Staying in such an affordable apartment is a bonus. It's cool that the city has a mix of tourist spots and everyday life. I'd like to see how the Bosphorus looks in person.
Actually, I've been there on vacation. Rather, it was a pilgrimage back when I was still a Muslim. It was an interesting experience. This was in 2011, in what was clearly a war-torn area, and people just continued going about life as per normal. Just as we left Syria, the crisis erupted big time in Damascus, where we had stayed, and just as we left Iraq, Baghdad had a string of suicide bombings. We stayed 4 hours from Baghdad. So yeah, it was intense, but I wish I had brought a camera along.
That sounds like a really intense trip. Sometimes, being in a place while it's going through turmoil gives you a different perspective on life. It's kind of wild how people adapt, and just keep living their lives despite everything happening around them. Not taking a camera must be a bummer. Those moments would have been interesting to capture, even if just for personal memories.
American here. I went to an outdoor play in Kilkenny in August 2014. It had been a lovely day, but just as dusk came on, some rain clouds were threatening to make us all a bit uncomfortable. All of the locals around me had rain gear, being used to this kind of thing. They immediately noticed that I did not, and despite my protests, the tiny Irish grandmother in front of me offered me the extra poncho that she always carries because she didn't want me to miss a moment of the show. I love Ireland.
That sounds like a nice experience. It's cool how people can be so thoughtful, especially in unexpected situations. The little things, like sharing a poncho, really show the warmth of community. It's those moments that stick with you, and it's nice to hear how a simple act made the experience better. Ireland has that reputation for friendly folks, and it seems like your story fits right in.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.